Yay, we're live. I'm back in the saddle. Tonight's very cool. We're going to talk about a couple of things. One is the video that I just posted this morning, more Ford supercharger on the LS, the GT500, although in this case it is a Ford racing supercharger using the adapter from Demuse Engineering. And it stirred up a lot of controversy, as you might imagine. I got the, and this just happened recently too. I got the most excellent comment that I need to read to you guys because it's a really good example of, and I love getting this stuff. I love getting these kind of comments because it allows me to elaborate on very good subjects. In this case, it's false equivalency, and because it's running rampant, obviously, in our country right now. So we want to talk about how people create their own situations, and then they create an artificial situation, like an arbitrary one, and then complain about that. But the situation actually doesn't really exist. But it's really cool to complain about it. So that's awesome. But what I want to talk about tonight is the video that I just posted is the throttle body test on the Supercharged application. And hopefully you guys have all taken a look at it and make sure everybody hit the like button. Yes, as the people are pointing out. On supercharged applications or turbocharged applications, on a positive displacement supercharged application, that's where throttle body size is critical. It needs to be big. And we're going to talk about what happens when it's too big, or what happens when it's big enough. The flip side of that, the other side of the coin, is that you have drivability issues. But the thing is, when you're drawing all of the air through, that air is going into the supercharger, and then the supercharger is forcing it into the motor. You have a different situation with throttle body flow than you do when you're pressurizing that. So if you have a centrifugal blower or a turbo and you're pressurizing the air, we've run 4-digit power level stuff on stock throttle bodies. I'm not telling you that you don't need a bigger throttle body. Really, you should size the throttle body for the inlet size of the intake manifold that you have. So if you have a truck manifold, put a throttle body on it that fits the truck manifold. If you have a TBSS or a fast, whatever, the throttle body should fit the size of that opening. That's a simple, easy rule. So if you're blowing through that, you don't need nearly as much throttle body. But so if you have for instance, if you have a 700 horsepower turbo motor, stock throttle body, no problem. If you have a 700 horsepower like we did, 5.3 with that truck Norris cam, with a positive displacement supercharger, the throttle body sizing becomes much more critical. Whereas on the turbo, we can blow through a stock throttle body. You saw from the video that a stock throttle body dramatically restricts that kind of application. As a matter of fact, it turns a 700 horsepower combination into a 650 horsepower combination. And that's the thing. That's always the deal. That's the interesting thing as a side tangent is that, yeah, we picked up 45 horsepower from a throttle body upgrade. Yeah, but only because we created a situation where the thing needed the throttle body and then we gave it to them. It's like my 175 horsepower cam swap video. And I did a story on that in the magazines a long time ago. And it makes for a great headline, or makes for a great cover blurb, or whatever. It makes for a good thumbnail. 175 horsepower from a cam swap. And the thing is, it's not clickbait, and it's not false. It's actually true. If you run a stock cam and then you run that cam, you pick up that much power. But the small print is that we did it on a 408 that had really big cylinder heads, and it had compression, it had displacement, and it had all the things, and intake manifold. It had all the things that it needed, and then we saddled it with a small cam. So it'd be just like running a NASCAR motor or a Pro Stock motor or a Top Fuel motor with a wimpy little cam in it, and then putting the right cam in, and then in the case of a Top Fuel, picking up 8,000 horsepower, an 8,000 horsepower cam swap. That's all that we did, and that's what that 175 horsepower deal was. And that's kind of what this throttle body thing is too. On a supercharged application, we ran it at about 700 horsepower, and if you run it at that power level, the throttle body needs to flow enough air to support that power level. When it's being forced through on a turbo or a centrifugal blower, it has pressure helping it, so it flows a lot more. But when it's having to draw through, the throttle body has to be big and has to be sized. And as we showed in the video, going from the stock one up to the 102, and it's interesting, I don't know if you guys caught this, but in some of the photos, I think that they're in the video, the 102 is much bigger than the inside diameter of the oval opening that's used on that manifold. So it has to transition from that down to this oval opening. And so it's big and round, and then it goes down to an oval opening and gets a little bigger. So it's far from optimized. And yet, going from the big round throttle body, the 102 millimeter fast throttle body, to this oval throttle body, the EQUIFAB one, which we know flows a lot, and the EQUIFAB oval throttle body, the Super Cobra Jet throttle body, is designed to work with that oval opening. It's a perfect match for it. So you think of, if anything, that would be the ideal choice. And yet, when we did the test on it back to back, putting that oval throttle body on, I thought we were going to see more boost and more power and all that. And there's a reason we're going to have to revisit that. We'll talk about that later. But we didn't really see much. We didn't see much in the way of power. So one of two things is happening. One, are we running into a slippage problem that is limiting us? The other thing is, and we talked about this in the video, is that are we already at a point, are we already at that crossover point where we have enough airflow from the throttle body that we're testing, i.e. the 102 millimeter throttle body, the fast one, or does the fast throttle body flow as much as that oval throttle body does? And is that whole system enough right now to feed this power level? So that's the interesting thing, is that, and as we showed, it even picked up power everywhere. The supercharged combination liked the bigger throttle body basically everywhere. It liked it at the bottom, but where it really liked it, and this is normally what happens with airflow devices like this, it picked up a lot more power at the top of the RPM range than it did at the bottom, because that's where more restriction is. The size of the throttle body, the amount that it will flow, is enough to support the lower power level at our starting RPM at 3,800 or 4,000, where we were starting it at. But that becomes less possible and becomes more restrictive as we go up in engine speed. So having to feed it up there becomes more and more difficult. So what we see is we have an increase in the gain in power that we get from going to the bigger throttle body as we go up in RPM. And in this case, the up in RPM also equates to going up in airflow and power output. So we get bigger gains on the big end than we do on the small end on these positive displacement blowers. So the positive displacement blower needs a big throttle body. Whatever you can do, put a big throttle body on it, get as much airflow. And it's not just the throttle body. It's everything in front of the spinning rotor. So some kind of inlet manifold that's either attached or part of the casting of the supercharger assembly. We had an elbow on ours, that part, the throttle body. And then another thing that a lot of people forget about is anything that's in front of the throttle body is also a potential restriction. So if you have this big throttle body and you have it neck down into the stock air cleaner assembly, that's going to be restrictive. So having a big air inlet tube and mass air meter or whatever else you're going to do, we didn't run a mass air meter because we were running speed density and we just ran an open throttle body. But if you have a big air inlet, you have a filter on it, all of that stuff becomes super important, because all of that stuff has air drawing through it, and it's very important for it to flow as much as it can. So let's talk now about the the flip side of that, or the potential downside of putting this kind of giant throttle body on an application, especially a positive displacement blower. And this goes way back to when I was doing testing with the Jim Kenny Bell stuff with Jim, and we were running 90 millimeter throttle bodies on new Blowzilla or Flowzilla, whatever he was calling the inlets going into these bigger superchargers. And they needed, it needed more air inlet. They needed a revised air intake, and they did that. And it also needed a bigger throttle body, and they did that. The thing is that the opening rate of the throttle body can be at times problematic on the street. And this is especially the case with the oval throttle body. Because if you go to 10% throttle on a 78 millimeter throttle body, it flows X amount. If you go to 10% throttle opening on a 102 millimeter throttle body or on the oval throttle body, the amount of surface area that you've uncovered and the attending flow rate is now X times 3 or 4. So at that same throttle movement, you've all of a sudden, you've all of a sudden opened things up. And so the 10% throttle opening on the bigger throttle body is like 20 or 30 or 40% on the smaller throttle body, but you've moved it the same amount. So as you might imagine, it becomes like super touchy. And then you have the blower on top of that. So you're not just opening it to an NA motor, which is problematic enough. I can remember, and I used this example in the video on my Ford Focus, putting a 65 millimeter throttle body and port matching the intake manifold, the composite intake manifold, to the bigger throttle body. It was super touchy. The thing felt a lot faster. When you measured it on a dyno, of course, it didn't make any more power because the throttle body wasn't restricting the setup, the intake manifold and the mild cam timing and all that. But it felt, super responsive on the street. But if you multiply that by 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 at V8 power, and the supercharged V8 power at that, you're going to have the tip-in thing that is really, really super responsive. And so you just have to be mindful of that. One of the things I mentioned in the video is that with a drive-by-wire throttle body, that stuff a lot of times can be programmed, because even though you're moving the throttle pedal a lot, you can adjust the rate that the throttle actually opens. And so you can open it at a rate that's smooth and controllable, and then it'll get to wide open throttle. But it won't be so like herky jerky, and it won't take off. And in some cases, these things make enough power that it just wants to spin the tires. So that's the other potential downside to having the big throttle body, is drivability obviously can be an issue, and more on PD blowers like this than on centrifugal or turbo applications, because they just don't have the same issue. For one, you can use a much smaller throttle body. And so this was a good test. I also, in the video, I included we saw a drop in power, obviously, or a gain in power from the bigger throttle body. But on the smaller throttle body, we saw a drop in boost. So as the RPM went up, we started off on the load end where the throttle body could support the airflow needs of the motor. So we could see like full boost. We saw 14.7 pounds. We saw 200 kPa. But as we allowed the thing to run RPM, we saw a dropping boost curve. So now the question should be, is that because of the throttle body? Is it becoming restrictive? Which we know that it is, because I've done this test many, many times. It definitely is doing that. Is it belt slippage, which is certainly a possibility on a 6-rib belt making this kind of power level. And there is belt dust there. The thing is, it was like awfully repeatable for it to be these other things. Maybe the belt slippage is repeatable. Maybe the crank was moving on or the damper was moving on the crank because I didn't pin it and I should have. But it was very repeatable for having an issue like that. So to me, it makes more, using Occam's razor, it makes more sense that it would be the most logical thing that, yeah, we have a smaller throttle body. Because the other thing that happened is when we put the bigger throttle body on there, we saw a change in the boost curve. So the load in was making roughly the same boost, 200 to 201 kPa. And then it just didn't fall off the way it did with the smaller throttle body. So if something was slipping, it would be more likely to slip with more load on as we were processing more air and making more power and making more boost. And that's exactly what happened. We put the bigger throttle body on there. Instead of dropping down from 14.7 pounds down to 12.9 pounds, it was going from 14.7 pounds to about 14.2 pounds. So it's dropping a little bit, but not a lot. It makes me wonder if, pinning the crank and redoing this, if this thing wants to have a flat boost curve, or if it would want to have a rising boost curve on this combination. It was not. It was still fairly mild. It was a 5.3, with 799 heads. It was the L33 with the Truck Norris cam in it, which is fairly mild. It was still making good power, but a bigger cam would allow us to make more power. And then the side benefit of making more power with a bigger cam is that we would also bring the boost down. Would we only bring the boost down at the top? Or, these are the questions that I go over with myself. And lucky for me, I have thousands of tests of data to go back and look and go, oh, well, it does this, or it does this, or it does this. So, but it's also why it leads to even more testing. So now I want to go back and rerun it. I just sent text over a message over to Tom, the guy that designed the adapters for this. He has adapters for the Holley high ram and low ram and stuff. And I think what I want to do is I would like to run a comparison between the intake manifold that we ran already, very short runner, just a big kind of open common plenum, and then the short ram or the super short ram, whichever one they have, and then the high ram, the low ram or super low ram, whatever, and then the high ram. And the reason I want to test it is because we're changing runner length. And so it would be like, you guys that have been to the live feed a lot know that I always show Freiberger's big block, where they tested the normal kind of short runner, big open plenum radius entry going into the head, essentially the way that most roots blower manifolds are. And then they also ran a tunnel ram on it. And in fact, they talked to me about it before they did it. And I was having good conversations with Brule about it, because I said, yeah, it's probably going to make more power everywhere, because we know that tunnel ram will make power at the RPM range that you guys are running this thing in. I said, so my guess is the difference between a runner that's this long and one that's, whatever the tunnel ram is. I said, I think it's probably going to be better everywhere. And that's kind of what happened. And so I think that we will see the same thing. If we go from the intake manifold that we have to, and I'm hoping that the low ram will be enough of an intermediate thing between what we have and then the high ram. And then the high ram, and again, in the RPM range that we're running which is like 6,500, I'm thinking that the high ram is probably going to be better everywhere. But it would be an interesting test. But obviously, before we do that, we got to make sure that there's no belt slippage and that we have a big enough throttle body, which is why I wanted to do this test. I also showed in the video charge temperatures. So we showed the range of charge temperatures, and they were fairly repeatable. We have a big water source, but even still, the water was fairly high because I was making a lot of pulls. It was 98 degrees or so was the water temperature going in. And we were rising that to 110 to 100. I think the highest one was 116. And oddly enough, that one was with the smallest throttle body. And so that's one of the things I put in the video, that, hey, why do you think that this is happening? It has lower boost. Why would it have a higher charge temperature? So I like to get comments from guys when they're looking at that kind of stuff, so that everybody can participate. So we had good, I did a lot of data logging with that so that we could log all the stuff with the Holley. And then obviously we did everything that we could to make sure that the air fuel and timing, the timing was exactly the same, because once we had the timing set, and I think I included that in the video, I showed you what the timing curve was, and I just made it the same everywhere so that it didn't change with boost, because when we change throttle bodies, we're changing boost. So I didn't want the timing to also be part of that change. So if we go down in boost and up in timing, is that a net zero? So it made the same power. I didn't want to do any of that. That's why I filled in all of those. So for you guys out there, that's not the way a timing curve should look. I mean, it might look like that at one kPa range, at one cell range, but it typically would be what we do normally is, especially at any RPM, as you go up in boost, you go down in timing. And then as you go up in RPM, you go up in timing. So you have both of those dynamics happening at the same time. So you create this grid, and hopefully that you have it right. It doesn't need nearly, and nor will it accept nearly as much timing down low, especially at higher boost. It doesn't need that down low just because of RPM. Whether even if it was just naturally aspirated, it doesn't need as much timing at lower RPM than it does at higher RPM. So you're trying to have the timing happen, and having the cylinder pressure happen at the right piston position after top dead center. So as you go up in RPM, you have to start that process earlier and earlier. And that's why you don't have as much timing down low as you do at top. And then with boost, the same thing happens. You're going to have less timing because you have boost, but you're also going to have the same kind of function. You're going to have less boost down low than you do at top, even though all of those numbers are lower under boost than they are NA. So, but I didn't do that. We knew that we ran 21.5 degrees at the top of the RPM range. We ran much less, 13 or 14 or something, or 15 maybe, at the load in, which is around between 3,500 and 4,000. And then we kind of had a rising timing curve. At some point, we got to where we had 21 basically all the way across. And it would do that. Like I said, we had 100 pulls on it. So this poor little L33 is like, hey, I don't have ring gap or anything. You guys are like running almost 15 pounds. But like I said, that's why I did that. And when I showed that, I don't want somebody saying, hey, look, this is Richard's timing curve, I should use this. No, you shouldn't have that much timing, you know, at higher boost levels and stuff. So, but that worked out really well. That was a good test. Before I start answering questions, I wanted to read you a very good comment that I got, which was awesome. I can see if I can find it. Okay. So right off the bat, you'll be able to see that this is, there's a lot of emotion here, and and that's kind of what I want to discuss. So this is the comment I got just from somebody that I don't know, or some arbitrary person. It was a message. You should be ashamed of yourself for hawking that POS LS blower adapter. It may work on the engine dyno. It's not going to work in a real car in the real world. There's two reals, by the way. It's not going to work in a real car in the real world, though. The very place people actually drive their cars. You're just another sellout in a sea of hot rod sellouts. So we can discuss this. And this was my discussion on false equivalency. So the first thing is that when I get a comment like this, I don't look at it from an emotional standpoint, because I don't do that on most things. I look at it analytically. So the first thing I do is I get rid of all of the conjecture and emotion and stuff, and I try to look at the things that were said. So what is the technical aspects of something that's obviously very emotional? The technical part is, so the things that were said that I would contest on a scientific level are that that it may work on the end. So here's one. So this is a comment. This is a statement. It may work okay on the engine dyno. It's not going to work in a real car in the real world. Okay, so when I hear something like that, what I want to hear, being an analytical guy, is that because if somebody wants to have a discussion about something and they're saying that something doesn't work, I'm all for it. I want to hear their information. Unfortunately, there's no data here. So I'm on my side with data that I have to support the statements that I make. But there's none over here. All there is apparently is anger and conjecture. And that disappoints me, because if the comment would have said, look, it may work on a dyno or work better on the dyno, it's not going to work on the street because of, and then we have a list of things. When I did my testing, the charge temperature rose, 60 more degrees, and then I got heat soak, and then the boost dropped, or whatever the things are. That's what I want. I want those things. I want actual data. That doesn't exist in this comment, but this is a perfect example. I would be discussing like data filled stuff, and there isn't any there. So the next comment is, and there's and I responded to this telling them that, look, factory Eaton superchargers obviously have worked well for decades. So they work in a dyno, they work out in the street, they work at OEM applications. So trust me, they've been tested. The other thing is the data that I have on the intercooler, it seems to work fine and be more than enough for this intended power level. And also the thing is, I know from my with the data that I have, first of all, the statement's incorrect, because it does work on the dyno and it works on the street. I know that it does because Tom has sent me endless videos of him with this system in his truck, driving around, doing burnouts and all that stuff. Now I that's not like 100% like data. I'm not going to, stake my reputation or my life on it, but it shows that it does work. It works in a vehicle. It's driving around. I don't know that I would go try to run the 24 hours of Le Mans with it. And also, I wouldn't ever say that the way that we have it on an engine dyno isn't fully optimized compared to the way that it would be on the street. Like if somebody wanted to have that discussion, they have a leg to stand on. Look, you're running colder water. You got an unlimited source. That's a better deal. You're running cold air. You've got an open throttle body. It's not under the hood. All of those things, 100% accurate. That being said, it is out running in a car and working and driving around. So we know that the statement's not accurate. But then, and here's my point, is that you say those things, people say these things, because it could be this, it could be lots of things. They make a statement, oh, that thing would never work in the car. So they make that statement, and then that becomes their truth. And then because that has happened, that's a real thing now. Now they get to complain about it and tell you what a sellout you are because you're trying to hawk something that you know doesn't work. It hasn't actually been established that it doesn't work. It's just been said that it doesn't work, erroneously in this case, that it doesn't work. But now we get to complain about it. So we create a situation and then complain about said artificial situation. So that's what it's come to. But there's more. And then obviously I'm a sellout. This is interesting because I would have to extrapolate this stuff, that I'm a sellout because I'm telling people how great this is. And I pointed out to them that all I do is test stuff, that I don't sell anything. So to me, a sellout would be as if I decided that, look, I have a company that now wants to come on board and sponsor my channel, which I'm going to have channel sponsors pretty soon. So wait for that. But I had a channel sponsor that sells jewelry. I get hit up every day, almost, certainly several times a week, from people that want to give me things or be involved in the channel only because of the numbers that are involved. And they want me to hawk something that I don't know about, that I've never tested, that is not part of this channel, that is an encyclopedia, or it's a brooch, or I don't know, whatever it is. I tell them, nicely the same thing, that doesn't really fit with this channel. That would be, to me, it would be me selling, hey, look, this new design of spark plug, it's the best thing ever. When I can't actually show you that it's the best thing ever, because it's not the best thing ever. It's just another spark plug. That would be selling out. But if we create an artificial situation, and then we can say now that he is selling out, even though not only am I not doing that, I'm not doing that because of the artificial situation. But there's more. So now we're getting into a little bit more technical. So that intercooler is not big enough, doesn't have enough water flow to keep the inlet air temperatures under control when installed in a car. So that's actually a fairly technical statement. But after that, there's no data that says, look, when I did my testing, here was the heat transfer rate. Here was the temperature under cruise conditions. Here was the temperature under extended wide open throttle. Here is the power level that I was at. Here is the inlet air temperature. Here's all the data that supports the thing that I said. What I'm giving you there is just my opinion. And that's okay, except that it's not phrased as an opinion. It's phrased as an absolute. Here's the next statement. That belt system is an absolute disaster. Not quite technical, but more Irwin Allen-y, but that's okay. It won't survive one hard shift. So again, speculation about, and maybe knowing that I can't do a shift on the dyno, but lucky for me, Tom has it running in his truck and has gone out and run on the road and done hard shifts. And I've made, like I said, 100 pulls at this thing to 6,500 RPM. And if there was going to be an issue with the belt, it would be an alignment problem or something. I guarantee that this thing will take full throttle shifts. I know that it will. And Tom has already done it. So there's already data to support that. So again, not accurate, but no data to support whether that's accurate or not. You say that you just test stuff. That was part of the thing that I told them. I said, look, I just test. I don't sell things that, the problem with that statement is that unless your videos have a disclaimer, have to have a disclaimer that say may not perform as seen in the video installed in a car or truck, buyer beware, you are responsible for disseminating false information by omission. Awesome stuff. only showing the positives and none of the negatives. I think we showed all of that stuff. Like it or not, you are advertising for whomever made this thing. There's only one way to not be an advertising conduit. I like that word, though. That's good. And that is to tell the entire story. And he goes on to say that I have no morals and yada, yada, yada. This, I don't know who this is, but it strikes me an awful lot as I have an individual that attacks me like this on occasion. And you guys all know him. And he goes off on this on occasion. But the interesting thing is that these sort of like, these sort of statements that are wholly emotional and 100% not factual, that has become the norm. And you can't make statements like that without stuff to back it up, because I'm not going to get emotionally charged about it. I'm too analytical for that. I want to know what is the data that supports that, because I have data on my side. So that's enough of that. But anyway, let's see what you guys got going on. If I had money, I wouldn't waste it on parts or tool. I'd waste it on more important things like beer and gas. That's good. I got to put a lot of soul into the message. Yeah. So our test is, let's see, our poll for today is going to be throttle body related. Big throttle body on your PD blower. Okay, so the poll for tonight: should you always put a big throttle body on your positive displacement blower application? Boom. Yeah, the dynos are fake news. That's good. That's good, Dan. Wait, were the messages from Uncle Tony? I know you would think, right? That would be awesome to install the intercooler in a boat. Then you basically have unlimited, and not only is it unlimited, but I haven't been to too many lakes that are 95 degrees. Most of them are 60 or 70. So now can we afford and buy blowers again? No, that ship I think has sailed. Richard, have you done much on 8 Series Hondas? No, only back in the day with Oscar Jackson. Excuse me, when he was putting the blowers on the Preludes and stuff. But I haven't even run one on the dyno. It's not going to work in the real world because you didn't pin the crank. The AC compressor load would have made the crank pulley spin on the crank. The AC compressor load isn't even close to what the blower is. But that's okay. And I honestly, and I'd like to measure this, but I would suspect that the AC is nowhere near what the water pump is either. How do you get a rising boost curve on the positive displacement blower as a snowmobile clutch pulley? You can easily get a rising boost curve on a positive displacement blower. You can do that by sizing the blower with the airflow needs of the motor. The airflow needs of the motor obviously change. Yeah, speculation is not. I get that a lot. I get people that want to argue speculation versus data, and it's just foolish. I just tell them I'm not interested. AJ, thanks for showing up, man. Rick, that's a good question. How come there's only 50 thumbs up and 121 people watching? The Mercedes blower has a clutch blower, a blower clutch on it. Richard, I have a root style 8. I'm sure that should be 871 on a 6-liter truck motor. Can you please help me with cam selection, 8 psi? Take a look at the 671 stuff that I did on the 383. That'll give you a pretty good idea. You just need a good NA blower on there. I mean, an NA camshaft on there. Any adapters like that to run these blowers on a small block? Actually, on a small block, it would be even easier. What most guys have done for blower stuff on those, when a blower manifold didn't exist, is you just make a thick plate, a square plate that bolts to the carbureted manifold, and then you mount the blower to that. Is there supposed to be a displacement ratio that should be maintained between the engine and the PD blower? There was back in the day, but the thing is, it depends an awful lot on blower speed. So you can speed up the smaller blowers. I look at it in the way that I look at everything else, is the airflow and power potential of the blower versus the NA power output of the motor, and then the desired RPM. It's like having a bigger turbo. You know, if you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower with a blower, you don't want to put a 1,000 horsepower blower on. You want to put a 1,200 horsepower blower on it, because then you have some in reserve. it always works out better. I believe the AC clutch shuts off at wide open throttle. Most of them did. I'm pretty sure my Mustang did. 1471 was 66% over. Is that top fuel stuff? Seems like it. So why don't I have any comments about the fact that I ran this junkyard 5.3 liter without ring gap at 15 pounds? Also heard that bigger blowers don't have the low end. It does change if you. I've run tests with Kenny Bell on the different blower sizes, and I would imagine the same thing is going to happen with, like, TVS and these other kinds of roots blowers, especially if you're regulating them for a given boost level. If you run a big blower and a small blower with the same pulley on it, the big blower is just going to be better. Happy hour at the house. Nice. 15 pounds with race gas. I also ran the same boost on pump gas, which that's the next video that's coming up, because I couldn't change the pulley, so we just had what we had. And we didn't run race gas, we ran E85. If you pin the real damper, okay, and thin the oval throttle body shaft. I don't think it's limited in airflow through the throttle body. I don't think that doing any modifications of throttle body are going to be necessary. So a bigger blower at low speed should be more power. I don't think you can make an absolute statement like that. Oh, I forgot to show you guys. Hard to see. You can't even hardly see now. While I was working on the grinder, I decided it'd be a good idea to jam my thumb into the grinder. It takes off quite a bit. Pinning the damper is a thing. Yeah, that's pretty common, because all of the press fit dampeners, like on the LS and stuff, and I think probably Coyote. Do Coyotes have those too? They just sell you a kit that they do it two ways. ATI has a different one. Most guys sell you a kit that you drill in between the mating surface, of the damper and the crank, and then you put a roll pin in there and it stops it from turning. A lot of times we'll do two. We'll do an upper and lower. The way that ATI does it for theirs, because their dampeners, even for an LS, are keyed like a small block Chevy. So what they do is you drill a perpendicular hole and then put a dowel in there, and then you slide the damper on. Then the damper is in one spot, but it doesn't matter. It's in one spot, and then the bolt holds the dowel up in place. Squirrel Tune 4.8 ran 1,300 horsepower stock gap. It's all in the tune. It's not all in the tune. That's not accurate. Having the rings butt together is a real thing. So what's the official answer on why the inlet air temperature was cooler with the bigger throttle bodies? I don't know the answer to that. I was actually asking the question. I don't know if it's an anomaly that happened while I was testing. I would want to run it 20 more times to make sure that it's doing that. I like how snappy this thing is. With a big oval throttle body on here, this thing, when you're rolling into it, it gets happy really fast. See, you would think that at a higher temperature, I mean, at a higher boost, you'd have a higher temperature. We always see that. And you'd think that at a higher power level, that there'd be more parasitic loss associated with driving the blower. So the blower should be working harder as it's pumping more air. So, so both of those things lead me to the wrong conclusion. Do you think that the fast LSXR1 or 2 would be the best manifold? 403, 219-degree cam, ported 241 heads? Yeah, and that kind of RPM range that you're running, a 219 cam on a 403 is going to make power pretty early. I think you touched on it today's video. I didn't cover this. Why did the manufacturers drill holes in the throttle blade for idle air? Why not just give the throttle stop half a turn or adjust the idle air motor? Either way. I don't remember which one of the throttle bodies had that. It might have been one that somebody, a lot of times the throttle bodies that I run will be ones that are just in the cabinet that somebody may have drilled a hole through. I don't know if that was factory or not. The Nova is not sitting in the driveway. It's actually going to be delivered here in the next couple of days. I'm still thinking it's more airflow. So you're thinking that less airflow going across had brought the temperatures higher? Oh, Dan, yeah, we should have had to pull the throttle body off. See, that's the other thing. I don't know if the throttle body, once we got, like, let's say once we got the oval throttle body on there, I don't know if now the stuff behind the oval throttle body might be the restriction. I didn't airflow test any of that stuff, so I don't know what now is the limiting factor. If anything, it might be because that throttle body flows, maybe it flows 2000 CFM. We're only making 700 horsepower, so there's really, and the other thing I didn't do, which I'm going to do when we run this thing again, I'll monitor vacuum in that air inlet going into the blower. Todd's in the house. So this is interesting. The inlet air temp gets higher because the compression ratio across the blower, so the delta, with the bigger throttle body, you have ambient air pressure at the inlet of the blower. So we have a bigger change going across there? Is that what you're saying? At high altitude at 3,000 horsepower electric motor, that would be a big electric motor. Needs forced air to cool it off. It's not designed for high altitude. Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Motors with 1,550 to 200,000 have ring gap built in. That's also not accurate because I'm sure I've done 40 or 50 of these motors, and I've pulled lots and lots of them apart, and there wasn't a correlation between mileage and ring gap. I saw motors that had 200,000 miles that still had ring gap in the teens. Have you done the math to find out the total square surface area difference of the large and oval throttle bodies? I don't know about the oval throttle body, honestly. I would like to flow test them, but even that would be, the rig that I would have to set up for the different throttle bodies. I think Mahovitz might have flow numbers on that Super Cobra Jet throttle body. He actually told me, because I got the throttle body from him, I got the blower from him too. He told me that he thought that the flow rates between those two throttle bodies was very similar. Will you be selling the blower when you're finished? It's just on loan. Actually, John is interested in selling the blower. So if you're interested in the blower, here, I'll put my email address up because it's just something that he had sitting around. That's my email address. So if you're interested in that blower, let me know. I know that the price of all the other blowers has been jacked up because somebody did a story on them. He is interested in selling the blower. It's just the blower and the elbow, not the throttle body, no injectors or anything, and none of the other blower stuff because all of that stuff belongs to Tom. I'm just going to send it back to him when we're done testing. Trace them on a graph paper and count the squares. Yeah, we could do that. Or we could just flow them since we have a flow bench. that would be more accurate rather than speculating on it, because the surface area is also not going to tell you the flow rate. It's going to tell you potential flow rate, but do they have radius entries? And, you know, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. My 6-liter rain gap was 28 to 32 stock. That's bigger than I've ever seen a stock one. How much does quench distance affect power? I've never seen a back-to-back test where that's the only thing that they changed. They changed it from 15 to 20 or 30. I took apart a motor the other day that had negative quench because the pistons were actually hitting the heads. Worked on some large vacuum pumps. The plumbing on the low pressure side got very hot. Yeah, Mahovitz he's been doing modular stuff. I mean, we told him you need to have a bigger motor. I'm going to do it with a 4.6. The inlet that blower is closer to oval and circular. I don't know about the one where the rotor pack is, but the elbow is certainly oval. Could larger headers cool temperature? I don't know. You know, that's interesting. I've never done a test to see. I don't think that I think you'll see a cooling of the header if it's bigger, but I don't think that will affect the temperature of the exhaust exiting the head, though. What kind of flow bench? They have a super flow. I think that Westex is a 600, and I think that Kenny Bell might have a 900. Yeah, and the one at Kenny Bell, he's wicked his up too. I think he put a boosted pump on it or something, so they really turned it up. Normally we flow them when we flow a throttle body, we flow it at 5 inches and then do the calculations. Vans, you're going to ask me a tuning question. I'm not going to be able to answer. You talked about the tune being important with large throttle bodies. How can you resolve this by tuning if it's a large drive-by cable throttle body? I don't know. I don't know what the tuners do for street for that to try to help smooth it out. I'm assuming that they would probably pull timing or something to try to decrease the power output there. But I like I said, I'm not a tuner, so I don't have to. Luckily, I don't have to do that. As long I can roll into the throttle as fast or as slow as I want. Usually, it's slow. My clients are Jimmy Bones, Jimmy Bag of Donuts. My clients are running 84 millimeter throttle bodies on TVS 1320 screw blowers, 3-liter V6s. Picks up a good bit of power over the stock 70. I would think so. That it'll tell you if you have a throttle body in front of a positive displacement blower, just get a vacuum tap between the throttle body and the blower. That'll tell you right there if you need more throttle body. If there's a lot of vacuum present, you're going to pick up power. You're going to pick up boost too. Well, those things go together. 6-liter, I pulled 300,000 miles, rings off, and there was so much carbon in the piston grooves. I cleaned them, reused them. The motor runs great. That's one thing that I don't know if I talked about that very much when I was doing all the big bang stuff. When we take them apart and do ring gap, I also clean the piston. I take and clean the ring grooves out. I take the oil rings out because those are usually not even rotating at that point. I take those out. I will usually wipe off the spacers and then knock all of the debris out of the oil ring, and then clean out the ring lands and then put it all back together. So basically it's rebuilt, right? Yes, pressure does create heat. No more donuts for me. Dark, she's telling me to lose weight. Let's car might go faster. That's right. That's cheap power right there. Yeah, when I'm doing the big bang motors or cleaning any of these junkyard motors, and if we take the rings out, it takes a while to clean. It takes more time to clean the pistons out than it does to cut the rings. Cutting the rings, especially with that super ring groove tool that or super ring cutting tool that the guys from Total who is it? Total Seal. And there's other guys that have now. I think Summit even sells one. But it makes it nice. And I was talking to my buddy Jimmy, the one that has the NSX, and he wanted to get a tool like that. And I said, well, you probably can get the Summit one. I said, because I don't, it has a dial indicator on it. So if you're at 15, you want to be at 25, you take off 10. But I usually don't do that. I'll usually take the first one will be a big swing. So if I need to take off 12, if I need to cut 12 thousandths off, I might take off 9 or 10 to begin with, and then test it and go, oh yeah, I still got 1 left or 2 left or whatever. You don't want to put it in and go, oh yeah, I overshot by 5. For me, on a big bang motor, that's a win. I would still run it. But if you're doing something and doing a purpose build, you want to be a little more exacting on it. But on the big bang stuff, it's nice because who cares? I mean, I could just, I had no problem doing a big bang motor with a WYSI wheel and just touching it on there. In Cup, we call most of the driver's left side weight. That's nice. Drivers are really easy to replace. Yep, Jimmy Bag of Donuts. Actually, I think it was Joey Bag of Donuts was from the movie, but see, Eric, that's a good question. Does the air get hotter under vacuum or does it get cooler? Because we know it gets hotter under boost. Richard needs a lab coat. I did want to get one of those for some of my videos. I have something that so I was driving home from West Tech, and I'm driving home late at night, like 2 o'clock in the morning, and all sorts of weird thoughts come to mind. And so I have something that I'm going to try in one of the videos. I want to see what you guys think about it. It'll be pretty fun. Have you ever had any luck running Total Seal gapless rings? I've never tried one on a turbo motor, only NA. Quadjets bog hard if vacuum secondaries open too soon. Should throttle opening always match engine demand even on fuel injected? They're not bogging because of airflow. They're bogging because of the lack of fuel when you open the secondaries. So the nice thing about a fuel injected car, you can snap the throttle open all the way, and the correct amount of fuel will be given to it, assuming that the tune is right. If you snap a carburetor open right away, if you have it set up right, it's going to work. If it's not going to work as well. Mike, you can actually adjust the air valve springs on Q-Jets. Yeah, that's one of the adjustments for it. And now we're talking. And you can flip the air cleaner lid over, because that's really the first thing that anybody should do if you have a Quadrojet. Russell, and they race NASCAR at road race courses. They race at Watkins Glen. They race at Sears Point, which is now Infineon, or it might be called something else now. Could you do a test on inlet air temp on different fuels? Well, here's the problem with that. If we do it on a fuel injected car, there's going to be no change in inlet air temperature, because the fuel is injected after we would be measuring the inlet air temperature in the intake manifold. It doesn't affect that. It would only affect it if it's port injected. It would only affect that as it's going into the combustion chamber. and it's really difficult to measure that. You might be able to get away with measuring EGTs, and I've had people tell me, they swear to me that that's a direct crossover, but I don't think that it is. If we had injectors really high in an intake runner, we could do that. But then also you don't want to get, if you get moisture on the sensor, that can also be misleading. Jim is saying you ran total seals on a turbo Ford for years. It works good. Oh, Dan, you used to schlep around dozens of pairs of secondary metering rods. You had to have the kit. I mean, if you're going to be testing stuff, we've got boxes and boxes of jets and air bleeds and cams and all the things that you need for Hollies. I don't think at Westech, I don't think they have too much stuff for quadrajets because it's just, they don't come in very often. It was very cool to see when I was out with Courtney at Cadco, because they do a lot of quadrajets with the Cadillac stuff, to see them work with the Q jets out there was kind of cool. Let's make some noise. Found a picture of the lovely Lisa at SEMA when she was my car model. The test I have coming up on the blower is one, I have E85 versus 91. I also have a test where we open the bypass valve to see, I put it in valet mode basically to see how much boost we would knock out of it. And while that's cool to see it run at a much lower boost level, the interesting comparison, the thing that you guys are going to like the most, and the thing that I like the most, it's like kind of geek out on this stuff, is that it ran such low boost, I was able to compare it fairly effectively to the NA motor. And so there could be some speculation about how much power the blower is costing when you look at that low boost run relative to the NA power. So it's pretty cool. And then we also naturally get to see the change in charge temperature with the change in boost. And, it's just good to test that kind of stuff. And I'm even going to show you the tune on the 91. Are there any different size crank pulleys? ATI makes a bigger and smaller trucks offset damper too. You should see what you have to do when you tune Webers. I'm familiar with Webers. I've tuned them quite a bit. I had side drafts for a long time on my Z car. Ooh, Mike, I got 60 miles per gallon last tank of my Honda Insight. Gas mileage is going up with warmer temps outside. Kind of weird how the car thinks. Well, look, here's one of the things. When it's colder, the air density, so your aero is worse. That's why that there's an optimum elevation to be running land speed stuff at. Where there's a balance of the air temperature for the power, for the oxygen molecules for the power, and the reduction and the right elevation for the reduction in drag. Just think if you could run your Bonneville car and it had air, if you could run it in a vacuum. And hot air is better if you're ingesting hot air. You should have a hot air intake if what you're trying to do is get good fuel mileage. A hot air intake will definitely improve fuel mileage. Brian, Richard, have you done a test on an NA48 with the bigger throttle bodies on a stock intake? How's the Norris swap going? The Norris cam's already been running the 5.3 a whole bunch. That's been done already a bunch. Putting a bigger throttle body on the stock intake doesn't do anything because the opening in the intake is only as big as the stock throttle body. So anything else that you put on there is going to overhang the opening in the throttle body. It's not really going to do anything. You know who's really good at tuning Webers was John Concialdi from AEM. That's where that all started. Technically, the blower is taking less power from the engine when the bypass valve is open than closed. Crazy, it still takes that much power. Ryan, did you test vacuum before and after throttle body for the different sizes? No, I mentioned that earlier in this that I did not take vacuum readings because then we could have correlated it. And I did that a bunch with when Jim Bell when I was doing the throttle body test with him. We correlated because if you know Jim Bell, he likes to correlate the 0.2 and 2 miles an hour, and this thing is worth this much, and so he was correlating the vacuum present versus the gain and boost, and there seemed to be a fairly decent correlation. Yeah, Webers do look good on almost everything. The guys that tune SUs, those are neat. That's what I had on the Z, although my 260 had the trash can carburetors on it. I remember seeing that was one of the way that they used to run those SUs in front of turbos, and with no wastegates, and that's basically how they limited the turbo was the SU was the restrictor. What are you paying for a gallon of gas? I think mine was when I was driving back, it was like $5.30 at the truck. I always go to the truck stop. So a 2J doesn't get good fuel mileage? Isn't a 2J a variable cam motor? And an NA2J is going to have reasonable static compression too, right? Daniel, is it possible to inject RC car and nitro fuel? Yeah, you can inject that into a regular car engine. You just it has to be in the right ratio though. I didn't put 91 in the truck. I only put 87 because I'm not a 91 guy. I don't have 91 kind of money. The NA2J has VVT. Yeah, I thought that they did. Does the turbo motor not have VVT? Like a Supra? Does a Supra turbo have VVT? Did it? At least on one side? Single VVT? Let's see how our poll is doing because we got to get ready to go here. Should you always put a big throttle body on your PD blower application? 68% saying yes, 32% saying no, 99 votes. We had a lot more people here than that. Come on, guys. USDM Supra Mark IV was not VVTi. Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't buy gas for $6 a gallon. Now the Nova is gone. Oh, it's not gone yet. It's almost gone. It's mostly gone. Oh, now the Nova's gone. You need to stare at your other future build, your truck. Seeing GT500 blowers on the marketplace from $8 to $1,200. How much is the adapter? I don't know. What will the adapter do to the 4L60? Besides, we already know what my first modification is. WeatherTech. That's right. Four Weber IDAs look good on a North Star. They look good on a Ferrari too. My 5.3 Silverado gets 17 miles per gallon. Mine will get, if I drive a little under 70 on the freeway, which is not fun, it will get almost 20. Stromberg carbs and Stromberg updrafts, right? Because that's what everybody needs. Have you done a test on non-ethanol gas versus what? Half a dozen. I hadn't really ever looked into the Stromberg carbs very much. I know that they used to put multitudes of them on different motors back in the day. I mean, on different intake manifolds back in the day. You put 3 and 6 and 8, and I'm like, why are they putting that many carburetors on there? And then I actually saw one in person. I'm like, oh, Yeah, this is why. Because these are lawnmower carburetors. Have you dealt with Haltech? I haven't tuned with it, but it was a lot of guys used it back in the day, and I think that now I watched James do it out at Brian Tooley Racing when I was out there testing with them. Can you compound a supercharger with a turbo or vice versa to have any gains? You can. I have compound turbo supercharger stuff on the channel. 6 2-barrel Strombergs, yeah. What about twin 68 oval throttle bodies? Those work. The one that I liked that, in fact, there was a guy there at West Tech that had a Whipple, and they were trying to get it to make more power, and he had a single throttle body on it. I told him you need to make the Ram's horn deal so you have 2 of them, so you could have 2 throttle bodies, because 2 is definitely better than 1, right? I don't think I've ever worked on electron carb. Todd's in the house. Oh, the Strombergs were simple and plentiful. Yeah, they worked well. You just needed a bunch of them. Yeah, Strombergs had throttle plates about that. They did look. I thought that they were designed for something else. I really want to put tri-power Rochesters on that 347 Pontiac. Yeah, Todd, let us know what's going on. I'm gonna go up and visit Todd, and after we're doing a garage sale, and so after I do that, I'm gonna go up and visit him. I've got some Super Chaps money for him. Super Chaps money. Super Chaps. Super Chats. Was there a Rochester before that? They did have a 4G, I think. Was that the one before the Quadrajet? Daniel, off subject, but and this will be the last one for tonight because I got to get going. It's the weekend. I really enjoyed the video of you at the Honda at Bonneville. Are there any of you at the Mustang at the Silver State? No, that was all I think that was probably pre-YouTube or something. We didn't do any video, I don't think. There are some video. I was in the video that the people that made the video about the race did, so I could get some. But I don't think I have any. I did have some in-car from one of the races, because I even, while I was driving, and this was the funny one. This will be a story for the next live feed. I put a microphone in my helmet and connected it to the camera. And what I did was talk people through while I was racing the course. I'd tell, okay, we got a right-hander coming up. It's going to be this. It's this angle. It's going to be this fast. It's all this. It's the same one and I had that cord hooked up when I ran out of gas, and I had the 2-gallon can in my trunk, zip tied as you would, and threw all my stuff. I had to stop and pull over, and I threw all my stuff off and jumped out of my car and went to run to get back in the thing, and the cord was still hooked up. And when I ran to get back in the trunk, it like yanked my head back, and I'm like, oh yeah, the cord. And so I took my helmet. It was as you might imagine, it was a show. The people that there were course workers that were like, you can't work there, and I'm like yelling obscenities at them. They're like, okay, we're not paid to do this. We're not dealing with this guy. And since then, they've instigated rules based on Richard Holder stuff, which is kind of fun. So we could talk about some of the nonsense that went on there. It really was a fun race. I got to meet some really great guys there that I'm still friends with, and it's just like It's like racing. That's what you do. Okay, guys, I got to get going. Thank you all for showing up. Please check out the video on the throttle body stuff. You get to hear the blower run. Whoop, whoop. And that was the big oval throttle body. Thanks, guys. I'll see you all tomorrow. Boom.